And tonight's tale, the real monsters walk among us. The communication, part 4. To say that I was a little bit shaken up by finding the body of the pet I thought my husband had returned to the shelter was an understatement. We had adopted Belle, the little shepherd border collie mix, months ago, and she turned out to not be a good fit. She was a sweet little thing, but wanted to chew on everything, refused to potty train, and took to snapping and snarling at my husband and me every time we would walk into a room that she was in. It had hurt to let her go and bring her back to the shelter, but James had convinced me she would have a chance at a life with a family that was a better fit for her if we brought her back. I had cried the day he drove away with her, knowing that I would never see her again. But it was for the best. For her. At least, that's what I told myself. So when my newly adopted dog Thor dug her up in the backyard, bloody and mangled and discarded, yeah, I was shaken. There's only one way that poor, innocent creature could have ended up buried in the backyard like that, in a shallow, unmarked grave, just at the edge of the woods on our property line. Numb, I made my way into the garage to find an old tarp that we used to use when we went camping years ago, and pulled it off the metal shelf before making my way back to Belle, where she lay, broken, cold and alone in the dirt. With shaking hands, I picked up her remains and laid them gently on the tarp, doing my best to brush as much of the dirt and leaves and who knows what else off of her fur before I wrapped her up in a little bundle and carried her in my arms back to the garage. I laid her down on the workbench like that for the time being. She had deserved so much better than this. But there was nothing more that could be done for her tonight. Tomorrow, I would go out and see about options for pet caskets and about giving her a proper burial. I whispered over her before I turned off the light and closed the door to head back to the house. I am so sorry, Belle. By now, most of the trembling had stopped, though my blood was cold, despite the light sweat that was pricking my skin underneath James's heavy jacket that was several sizes too large for me. As I closed the door to the house and took off my shoes, I slipped it off with disgust and was tempted to chuck it in the garbage. Had James been wearing this coat when Belle had met her end? But I walked down the hallway and replaced it, nice and neat, on the hanger in the closet, ever the dutiful wife, before making my way into the kitchen. How long I stood there, scrubbing my hands in the sink, I do not know. No matter what I did, I felt dirty. When I had used the entire bottle of dish soap, my hands now scrubbed raw and bright pink, I reached under the sink for the powdered cleaner and dumped it liberally into the basin and began to scrub it with the steel wool. When I finished, I felt somewhat better. I tossed the scrubber into the garbage, then tied it up and brought it out to the can, where it sat at the edge of the driveway near the garage, near Belle. Once everything was finished and cleaned up, I made my way back upstairs to Thor, hoping he hadn't destroyed the room, or else that I wouldn't find teddy bear fluff all over the place. His ears and head perked up when I opened the door from where he lay, on James's side of the bed, as if he owned the place. Brand new pet bed, left forgotten by the window. I couldn't even be mad. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. I didn't bother to try to make myself sound cheerful, or happy, or anything else than how I was feeling inside. How did I feel inside? Like the static on an old cable television, just turned to the wrong channel. It was beyond numbness. It was something else entirely. Thor gave a yawn and a stretch, then hopped off the bed to trot over as I stripped out of my dirty clothes and deposited them in the hamper, turning his face away like a perfect little gentleman as I undressed. And, like a perfect little gentleman, he curled up outside the bathroom door as I stepped into the shower. I scrubbed every last inch of my skin with a brand new exfoliator sponge that I pulled from the cabinet under the sink where I kept them, until my skin was as pink and raw as my hands had been, and I washed my hair several times. And, just like Tyne stars, wrapped up in a towel, I grabbed the powdered bleach from under the sink and sprinkled it down. I was willing to do anything to try to keep my mind away from the horrific realisation of truth that was just beginning to creep up the back of my neck, knowing that when I finally climbed into bed and laid down still, it would all come crashing into me. There would be no avoiding it then. But for now, if I stayed busy, I could stave it off. I grabbed a single package containing a steel wool scrubber from under the sink and ripped the plastic open, discarding it with a deliberate movement into the garbage pail by the toilet, ran it under the bathtub, and swirled it around a few times in the powdered bleach on the floor of the tub until it mixed into a sort of paste. Then I began to scrub the shower tiles, starting at the top and working my way down. I paid attention to every single tile, working the paste and the wool into the grout around each one in turn, my eyes straining for any errant sign of dirt or grime or anything else. If I focused hard enough on the task, if I kept my mind numb, I wouldn't have to think about what happened. I made my way to the bottom of the tiles, where they met the tub, then moved back up to the shower head, stopping to pick up more of the powdered bleach and water paste when I needed it. I made my way slowly across the shower head and down the handle, then over the metal holder that held it in place on the wall. Under and around, scrubbing, the sound of the wool making a steady rhythm, the scratching sounds, a mind-numbing chorus of static that kept my thoughts away from Bill, and the thoughts of how much she must have suffered. I made my way down the length of the flexible metal tubing that connected the detachable shower head to the wool, and then turned my attention to the lip of the tub as I knelt down on the cold tiles of the floor, stretching to reach as I scrubbed along the joint where they connected to the tiles, and then along its ceramic top and down into the tub, the grey paste leaking its way down in little rivulets on their way towards the train, trying not to think about how thick and viscous Bill's own blood was when it ran freely from the slash mark in her poor mangled neck, and what kind of monster could do something like that to a poor defenceless animal, and how scared she must have been, her ears back and tail drawn under her legs as she shrunk away from her attacker, trying to make herself seem smaller, insignificant, a smaller target. And no, I couldn't think about it. I refocused on the task of scrubbing down the tub, ignoring the way my exhausted arms were shaking with the effort, and the pain in my lower back from being stretched so awkwardly across the tub to reach the backside. I was short, after all, just a little over 5 feet, and was kneeling across the tub to scrub and scar. I made my way through, around the tub, scrubbing the sides and focusing on nothing but hunting for a little speck, the smallest imperfection, to scrub away, getting back into the steady, slow rhythm of the scratch, scratching, to lull my mind back into the quiet stillness, rather than risk the thoughts that would make me fall apart. Once I had removed the train cover to scrub it, and as far down into the train as I could reach, I replaced the cover and stood up, removing the shower head from where it rested and turning on the tap. I rinsed the shower head off under the bath tap, then pulled the little silver lever to send the flow of water into the head. The drops shot out after a moment, with a little hissing sound as it pushed the air out through. I used the shower head to spray down the tiles, wiping gently with a hand to coax the last of the bleach down and into the tub to swirl their way down the train. Then I washed down the top of the tub, and finally the tub itself, before turning the water back to the tub tap and hanging up the shower head. I let the water run hot and hard for a few minutes before finally turning it off. My body was dry by now, and I hung up the towel, nicely folded, on the bar in the back of the door, before grabbing the steel wool and starting to scrub the floor tiles with it, layering on more powdered bleach from its little shaker and using the water from the bathroom sink. I wasn't ready to face the thought that I was trying to keep at bay, and this seemed like a good distraction. If I was attentive enough, dutiful enough, focused enough, I told myself, I could scrub away every last trace of what happened to poor Bill, and of James right along with it. Poor Bill. There was no way that I could have known what would happen to her. I told myself, as I closed my eyes and turned my face down to the floor tiles in defeat, my lips beginning to quiver and my cheeks tightening. It is not my fault. I had tried to do what I thought was best for her. I squeezed my eyes closed harder, fighting the tears that were threatening to spill. It was a terrible, horrible, disgusting thing. I was heartbroken and trying my best not to give in to that fear that was slowly starting to creep up the back of my neck. The fear of someone who could do such a thing. Not some spirit from a divination board, but a real flesh and blood monster. Slowly, one traitorous tear slipped from my right eye as I blinked my eyes open and returned to scrubbing away any trace of the nightmare and the fear along with it. Once we had finished scrubbing and wiped up the dirt and blight with some disposable Lysol wipes, the bathroom stood gleaming softly in the bathroom light. The smell of bleach was ready to choke me, and my arms ached from all the scrubbing. But my mind was mostly still. I wrestled all the cleaning supplies back into the black plastic bag from the bathroom pile and tied it into a tight knot. I held the bag in my left hand as my right reached for the doorknob. Thor jumped up, started a little by the door as it moved, and gave a soft little yip. I gave him a few quick scratches behind the ears as my way of saying thank you for guarding the door. As I set down the bag, I hadn't known Thor long, but somehow I knew he would understand. And I made my way to the small set of drawers built into the end table that served as my nightstand, and dressed in underclothes, black leggings, a big fuzzy pair of knitted socks, and an overlarge sweater. I picked up the bag of garbage from the bathroom and lay it inside the laundry hammer with an automatic motion. Every movement now on autopilot as I focused all my energy and attention on each step of the task, so as not to risk the television snow and static barrier of protection that I had built up in my mind. I pulled the plastic handle from the hamper up and tilted the hamper back onto its wheels and began to push it out the door and lug it down the stairs, Thor trotting along behind me for company. When I reached the second floor, I picked up the bag from the hamper and made my way to the front door to put my shoes back on. I told Thor to stay, and he sat obligingly down by the door as I slipped out to bring the bag out to the can, and then rolled it down the driveway for collection, since it was garbage night. I barely noticed the slight chill in the air until a little wind made its way up the dark street, blowing my hair out around my shoulders. It would be winter soon enough, and soon the snow would come to cover everything in a soft, white, clean blanket. I made my way back into the house, where Thor was standing guard, waiting patiently for my return. Such a good boy, that dog. I was lucky to have found him, and still couldn't imagine for the life of me why anyone wouldn't have wanted to take him home. He was so well behaved, intelligent, docile. He greeted me with that stern look his mask gave him, before it cracked into a little doggy smile, his red tongue lolling out to one side with a little pant. Another scratch behind the ears for the new little man of the house. Goodbye, Thor. I kicked off my shoes and headed back for the hamper, before trying it down the stairs to the basement. Thor following along slowly as I went, as if he didn't want to let me out of his sight again. And he sat by, his little chest stuck out proudly, facing up towards the stairs that we had come down, ready to protect from anything or anyone that might make their way down, while I addressed the laundry. I grabbed the little plastic bottle and popped its top open, measuring out the strange little white pellets into the cap, before dumping them directly into the bottle of the washing machine and replacing it on the shelf. I loved these things. They always made the laundry smell so good and fresh for such a long time after being washed. You could leave your clothes sitting in a drawer or hanging in the closet for weeks, and they would still smell like they were freshly washed. I laughed to myself. You know you're an adult when the latest in laundry washing technology excites you. I carefully removed the clothes from the hamper and shook them out one by one, before layering them into the washing machine, being sure to keep it balanced all the way around the ring, and then grabbed a laundry pod from its plastic box and sniffed it for a moment, before tossing it in on top of the clothes. Springtime freshness, the scent was called. I loved those little pods. They were so much easier than using laundry detergent, where you had to measure it out every time, and then deal with the dripping bottle and cap. Truly, a marvel in modern housekeeping. Then I measured out a little bit of the colour safe bleach into the little bleach dispenser built into the side of the washing machine and closed the lid, spinning the dial round in a full circle to line up with the heavy-duty wash cycle. Then I spun the little knob next to it into the start position. It began to hum quietly as the power came on, and then I heard the telltale hissing sound of the water pouring into the drum to soak the clothes. Thor turned at the sound, and I gave him a little pat on the head and another scratch behind the ears, before I yawned and made my way slowly back upstairs to the main floor of the house, switching off the light as I went, and double-checking that all the doors and windows were locked. I peeked out the kitchen window again at the driveway. Still no yellow GT. Good. Wherever he was, I hoped he wouldn't come back. I swallowed hard at the thought. The fear threatening to grip tightly onto me again, as my heart began to race and my chest started to heave with the growing panic and dread. I shook my head quickly, forcing myself to snap out of it, and I closed my eyes for a moment to stop them from continuing to widen with a fearful expression. And then made my way upstairs to the bedroom. Closing the door behind Thor and I locked that too, and pulled the covers back on my side of the bed as Thor leapt up to occupy James's side of the bed. I didn't see any harm in that. James wouldn't be sleeping in it anymore, after all. Not after what he did to Bill. No, I told myself no. He was not coming back into bed with me after that. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers over myself, and then settled against the big, fluffy pillows and tried to take some comfort from the warmth of the blankets and from Thor lying beside me on the bed. I switched off the light with the little remote next to me and picked up my phone. 4:12 a.m. Still no text from James about where he was. And even though I didn't want to see him again, even though I was terrified at the prospect of him coming home and having to confront him about Bill and the end of our marriage, I texted him, "James, where are you? It's after 4 a.m. You've been gone all day. Did you fall asleep in the parking lot at work or something?" I put my phone down on the nightstand and rolled onto my side under the blankets, shuffling my feet a little to find a comfortable position, and closed my eyes, not entirely sure what to do with myself at this point, besides try to sleep, even though I didn't have any idea how I would be able to do that. I was a mess. I felt at the same time so lost and scared, because everything that I had known about James and our life together had been a lie. He couldn't be this perfect and loving husband that I always thought he was if he could do something like that to Bill. Poor Bill. How could anyone do something like that to such a sweet, precious and innocent creature? My eyes burned with the tears that would not come, until eventually they spilled over and rolled down my cheeks unbidden, soaking into my pillowcase. My perfect marriage was gone, just like that, in the blink of an eye. The life we had been building together since we were 16 years old was all coming crashing down around me. All of it had been a lie. Just one lie after another after another. That happy little bubble that I lived in was popped. And there was no going back. I wept my heart out, realising that I could never go back to that ignorance that I had clung to for so long. now that my eyes had been opened, my tears finally ran dry, but the thoughts did not. It had all been a lie. The constant changing of jobs, all the moving around from one place to another, the reluctance to settle down and buy a house, the late nights at work, the consistent, unexpected overtime. None of it had been real. All just a farce to cover up what was actually going on. And I was too blind, too trusting, too stupid to see it. A wave of anger rolled over me then, as I realised that I had been duped for all these years, mistaking my happy little home and life for love, when I was nothing more than an alibi. Had he ever even loved me at all? I wondered as I lay there, all out of tears and with nothing left but an empty hole in my chest where my heart had once been. As the light from the rising sun slowly started to peek its way through the curtains, and I heard the loud sounds of the garbage collection truck making its way up the street, I had one final thought before I finally lost myself to the oblivion that was so much needed sleep. There are real monsters in the world, and they walk among us. I let my statement hang in the air for a moment, savouring the look of shock and horror on the young girl's face as it peeked out from behind the camera that was stuck between the bars of the cell from where she had been recording. I had always thought that sounded like a poignant way to end my story, and wished that I could have just left it like that, hanging in the air at my trial. But of course, I couldn't. The next thing I remember, I said, was waking up that afternoon to Thor barking his head off and a thunderously loud knocking on the door. It was the police coming to inform me of my husband's brutal murder. They were performing a routine check of the old watch factory building downtown, making sure there were no vagrants or protesters inside before they demolished it to make way for the new housing complex to be built. When they found his body lying there on the first floor, his skull cracked from what seemed to have been a fall through the rotted second floor of the building, and his throat cut. I hung my head and let my lips purse upward for a moment. The picture of remorse and regret and anguish before I looked up at the camera again, wiping the expression off my face to continue. They had found several others throughout the factory as well, all in varying states of decay. Some were skeletons, I found out much later. Some were fresher, the dumping ground for some monster that had been stalking the streets of the city for years. I did my best to hide the smirk welling up at the corners of my mouth, and to make my eyes appear soft and afraid. After a trial that went on for 3 weeks, I was found guilty of 12 counts of murder and sent here to death row, where I've been ever since, through appeal after appeal. I shook my head slowly and let my shoulders hang down in defeat with a sigh. The director nodded and called a cut to the camera rolling. The crew thanked me for my story and wished me luck, unsure of what else there was to say, before leaving and packing up. After all, what more is there to say when confronted with the condemned for the last time? This wasn't the first interview that I had given, but it would be my last. My execution was scheduled for shortly after midnight tonight. Any time now, the guards would be bringing me my last meal. We had requested lemon pepper chicken, garlic rice pilaf, and roasted asparagus. James's favourite meal, and I smirked wryly at the thought. Would I get angry at there not being enough asparagus? As I lay on the firm plastic mattress of my bunk, I closed my eyes and sighed again. I had spent years setting up chimes to take the fall if my dumping site were ever discovered, and my plan would have worked perfectly if only I hadn't gotten so fed up at him that night over the asparagus. It was a lot harder to set up your spice to take the fall after he'd taken a fall himself, just like that punk rat kid Cody when we were teenagers. I always knew he was the one who ratted us out about burning down that gazebo. He had it coming, really, if you think about it. Lethal injection. That was the prescribed method of my ultimate demise. I opened my eyes to stare at the cement blocks that comprised the ceiling of my little cell. How fitting, I thought, that I too should meet my end, staring up, unable to move as the darkness crept in, and wondered if, like Cody had described, the chemical concoction injected into me in that chamber would spread through my veins like a wave of never-ending cold. Cold, dark, alone. Just how every story about an encounter with a Ouija board should end.